On Father's Day, something happened that I will never forget. That morning started quietly, the kind of morning that makes an old man feel grateful. I am 72 now, and I've learned to appreciate small things. The sunlight falling in thin golden lines through the blinds. The warm smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. The quiet comfort of the home my wife and I built together in the suburbs of Atlanta. On the table in front of me sat one gift. A box. A shoebox-sized package wrapped in plain brown paper. It had come from my daughter, Anika. She hadn't called in weeks, and I hadn't seen her in even longer. So just the sight of her name on the label made me smile. I looked at the wrapping. It was uneven, the tape pressed on carelessly. That was strange. Anika is an architect. She loves clean lines, straight edges, perfect order. She never did anything halfway. But I told myself she must have been rushing. She has her own busy life, far away from ours. I didn't think much more about it. A moment later my wife, Amani, walked in from the kitchen. She was carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She took 2 steps into the living room and stopped. She froze right there, her eyes locked on the box. The color drained from her face. "Theo," she whispered. Her voice was thin, trembling. "Don't open that." I laughed softly, trying to ease the tension. "Now, Amani, don't be like that. I'm sure it's just socks again. You know Anika." I winked at her and reached for the coffee. But my wife didn't smile. She didn't even move. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Not worry, not annoyance. Fear. A deep unease that sent a shiver up my arms. "I'm not joking," she said firmly as she set the mugs down with a click. "Don't open it. Look at it. Really look." I frowned. To me, it was just a plain brown box. I picked it up. It was light, almost too light. "What is it you think you see?" I asked. Her fingers shook as she pointed to a corner where the tape had started to peel back. "There," she breathed. I leaned closer. My old eyes weren't sharp anymore. At first, all I saw was a small smudge near the seam, dark brown like dried mud. "It's just dirt," I said. "Probably from the delivery truck." Amani shook her head quickly, her lips pressed tight. "No, that's not dirt." Her voice dropped lower. "I was a nurse for 40 years. I know the smell of iron. I know the look of blood." Her words stopped me cold. I lowered the box toward my face. At first there was nothing. Then, faint but certain, it hit me. The metallic tang of dried blood. Coppery. Sharp. My stomach turned to ice. The room around me seemed to fall away. The cheerful sunlight meant nothing now. The smell of coffee disappeared. Even the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway faded into silence. Anika would never send a package like this. Not my daughter. Not unless something had gone terribly wrong. Unless she didn't have a choice. Slowly, as if the box were made of glass, I set it back down on the table. My hands trembled, though I tried to keep them steady. I looked at my wife. In her wide, frightened eyes, I saw my own fear reflected. We didn't need words. We understood. Something was very, very wrong. I reached for my phone. My hand felt heavy, almost separate from my body. I didn't dial 911. Not yet. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't touched in years. And I pressed it. 10 minutes later, the sound of sirens ripped through our quiet street. Morris. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, dry and harsh, a stranger's voice in my own throat. "Morris, it's Theo Coington. I need you at my house right now. Don't ask questions. Just come. And bring a forensics team." I hung up before he could respond. My finger hovered over the screen for a heartbeat, then moved to dial 911. This time my voice was clipped and precise as I reported a potential emergency, trying to hide the storm inside me. The 10 minutes it took for the sirens to arrive felt like 10 years. The clock on the wall ticked, but time refused to move. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room, broken only by the frantic thudding of my heart. In that silence, my mind began to run wild. It didn't stay in the living room. It fled backward, down the long hallway of memory. Years of polite smiles and ignored warnings flickered behind my eyes like a broken slideshow. Every image of my daughter was stained by the shadow of one man, my son-in-law, Chad. I remember the day Anna first brought him home. He looked like a magazine ad come to life. Tall, handsome, well-dressed, with the polished charm of a man used to getting his way. He was an investment broker, successful, confident. He had a smile that could sell sand in the desert. He said all the right things. Complimented Amani's cooking. Listened, or pretended to listen, as I talked about my old woodworking business. He called me sir in a way that was meant to sound respectful but always carried a small, hidden edge, like he was reminding me who he thought he was. It was there in little things. The way he'd gently correct Anna in front of us, framing it as a helpful suggestion, but really marking his control. The way he'd make jokes about our modest neighborhood, comparing it to his own wealthy upbringing. On the surface, self-deprecating. Underneath, a quiet warning of superiority. Amani and I saw it all. We shared looks when his back was turned. We felt the cold knot of dread forming. But we said nothing. We didn't want to be the overbearing, judgmental in-laws. We didn't want to risk pushing Anna away. So we smiled. We nodded. We welcomed him. And we ignored the quiet voice inside us that whispered something is wrong. That voice grew louder the day Anna came to us, her eyes bright, talking about the dream house Chad had found for them. "It's perfect," she said. "It just needs a down payment." Chad had explained it smoothly with a wave of his hand. His money was tied up in a long-term investment, he said. Just temporary. He'd pay it back soon. I looked at my daughter's hopeful face and made a decision that would cost me more than I ever imagined. I sold my workshop, the place where I had turned rough timber into art for over 40 years. My sanctuary. My piece of the world. It was more than a business. It was a piece of my soul. I gave them the money. Every last cent. No interest. No repayment date. Just a father's love and a silent prayer that this would make her happy. Chad shook my hand, his grip firm, his eyes full of practiced gratitude. He looked at me as if he'd won something. And sitting in my living room now, the sirens still distant but drawing closer, I wondered if that handshake had been the beginning of everything that had led to this box. "We'll pay you back every penny, Theo," Chad had promised. That was 5 years ago. We never saw a cent. It wasn't the money. Not really. It was the way he had taken our sacrifice and tossed it aside as if it meant nothing. As if it were his right to ask. As if giving up my life's work, my workshop, my pride, was simply my duty as a father. That was when I understood the truth. To Chad, we weren't family. We were a resource. And over the years, we saw the cost. Our daughter changed. The bright fire in her eyes, the confidence that had carried her through architecture school on her own, began to fade. Anna, my fiercely independent girl, started second-guessing every decision. She no longer spoke with the certainty that once defined her. Chad managed their finances, he said, because he was the expert. That was the excuse. With time, Anna's calls grew fewer. And when she did call, her voice sounded tired, strained. Her answers were clipped, rehearsed. I could always tell when he was in the room. I could feel his presence in her silence. The last time I heard her voice, just days ago, she whispered something about Chad's investments collapsing, about him needing her to co-sign for new loans. I warned her. I told her to slow down, to think carefully. She cut me off. "I have to go, Dad," she said quickly. And then the line went dead. I felt a chill then, a deep foreboding. But like all the other times, I did nothing. I told myself it was normal. Just a couple arguing about money. I chose denial because denial was easier. And now here it was. The box. The ugly brown box with its corner stained in silence and blood. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. A message meant for me. A price for my inaction. The rising wail of sirens cut through the heavy stillness of our living room. It wasn't a sound of chaos. It was a sound of reckoning. Every choice I had avoided, every warning I had ignored, was rushing toward me in that sound. Beside me, Amani squeezed my hand, her knuckles white. Her grip trembled, but I no longer did. The first rush of fear had hardened into something sharper. Focused. 2 police cruisers rolled to a stop at the curb, their lights spinning across our walls in red and blue. I was already at the door, waiting. The man who stepped out of the lead car wasn't just another officer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of steady confidence that came from years of carrying authority without letting it crush him. His face was serious, carved with the lines of responsibility. But when his eyes met mine, I saw respect, old, unshaken respect. It was David Morris. Nearly 20 years ago, he had been a boy with no direction, hovering on the edge of bad choices. I had brought him into my workshop then, taught him how to run a plane across rough timber until it was true, showed him that if you could build a straight piece of wood, you could also build a straight life. He never forgot. "Theo," he said, his voice a steady baritone. It wasn't the voice of a cop speaking to a civilian. It was the voice of a man speaking to his mentor. "You called." I nodded. My own voice sounded stronger than I felt. "David, thanks for coming so quickly. Come in." We stepped into the living room where the box still sat on the coffee table like a quiet accusation. 2 members of the forensics team followed him in. Dressed in white coveralls, carrying their silver cases, they moved with a silent precision that was both reassuring and terrifying. Without speaking, they began photographing the box from every angle. The clicks of the camera seemed to echo through the room, each one hammering home the truth. This nightmare was real. From the corner of my eye, I saw Amani. She stood pressed against the fireplace, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her eyes never left that dreadful package. She was staring at it the way a sailor stares at the horizon before a storm, knowing that whatever comes next, nothing will ever be the same again. Morris took in the room with a slow sweep of his eyes. They lingered first on the box, then on Amani's pale, stricken face, and finally on me. He didn't speak. He just waited. So I told him everything. I kept my voice level, almost clinical, as if I were giving testimony in a courtroom instead of reliving a nightmare in my own living room. I told him about Amani's warning, about the faint brown stain on the corner of the box, about the metallic tang of dried blood that clung to it like a whisper. I told him about my last call with Anna, the thinness of her voice, the abrupt ending, the weight of something unsaid. When I finished, silence pressed in again. Morris stood still, his sharp detective's eyes studying the room, as if trying to peel back the paint and plaster to see what truths had been hidden in our walls. Finally, he spoke. "You did the right thing calling me." His tone left no room for doubt. Then his eyes narrowed. "We'll take this back to the lab, get it processed right away. But I need to ask you, Theo, do you believe your daughter is in immediate danger?" I met his gaze without blinking. My voice dropped low, steady. "I don't think it, David. I know it." The forensics team moved with quiet precision, sliding the box into a sealed evidence bag. The sound of the plastic crackling felt too loud, too final. As they carried it out of our house, it felt like they were taking with them the last piece of ordinary life we'd had. Morris stayed behind, his expression grim but resolute. He knew me well enough to understand what that meant. I wasn't a man who jumped at shadows. For me to make a call like this, the danger had to be real. The trust between us, built in sawdust and sweat decades ago, was still there, unspoken but solid. At that moment, it was all I had to hold on to. Then my phone buzzed. The sharp vibration on the end table startled all of us. I froze. The screen lit up with a single name. Chad. A cold fury surged through me, so strong it made my vision swim. Morris caught my eye. His face didn't change, but his lips formed a silent word. Speakerphone. I forced a steady breath into my chest, though my thumb felt heavy as stone when I pressed the green icon. Hello, I said evenly, my voice a calm island against the storm inside me. Theo. Is that you? What's going on? Chad's voice filled the room. It was the same polished baritone I had always hated. Measured, smooth, built to inspire confidence. But beneath it I caught something else. A strain. A thin wire of tension stretched too tight. The police just called me, he continued quickly, asking these bizarre questions about Anika. Is everything all right? He was already laying bricks, building the foundation of his own innocence. They're here now, Chad, I said, keeping my voice flat, almost lifeless. Anika sent a Father's Day gift. There's a problem with it. A problem? His tone sharpened, then softened again, like an actor trying on emotions until he found the right one. What kind of problem? Is she okay? Where is she? The questions came fast, each one layered with a performance of panic so convincing it might have fooled a stranger. Not me. Not anymore. That's what we're trying to figure out, Morris cut in, his voice cold, clipped, official. Detective David Morris, Atlanta PD. Mr. Miller, I'd like you to come down to your father-in-law's house. We have a few questions. There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Chad's head, recalculating, deciding on his next move. Of course, detective, he said finally, his voice smooth as silk again. I'll be right there. I'm worried sick about her. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, a silver BMW 7 Series rolled silently up behind the patrol cars. Its headlights blinked off, its engine purred to a stop. Chad stepped out, immaculate as always. He wore a crisp navy polo tucked into tailored khakis, the kind of outfit that whispered casual wealth. The shoes on his feet alone probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw clean-shaven. And on his face, the perfect mask, the expression of a husband overcome with worry. But I knew better. Behind that polished surface was the man who had drained my daughter's light, who had turned her laughter into whispers. And now, I feared, the man who had sent us that box. This is excellent. Tense, layered, and dripping with subtext. You've got Chad playing the part of the perfect manipulator, while Theo stays composed, letting him hang himself with his own words. Morris is the silent anchor, observing. It feels like a chess match, every move calculated. A couple of things you could sharpen to heighten the psychological tension even more. Chad's performance. Emphasize the contrast between his polished act and the reality Anna confided to Theo. Show tiny cracks in his mask. Maybe his eyes flicker when Morris presses him, or his voice catches for just a beat before he regains control. That would make his act both impressive and brittle. Theo's restraint. You've already shown him holding back his rage beautifully. You might heighten this by giving us more of his inner body language. Clenched jaw, nails digging into his palm, his breathing shallow, as a counterpoint to his outward stillness. Morris's role, right now, he's quiet, neutral, but you could add subtle signals that he's not buying Chad's narrative. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a pointed pause before writing in his notebook. Even a deliberate silence could unsettle Chad. Here's a possible small tweak to the end for extra punch. He was gaslighting me in front of a police detective, spinning my daughter's blood into nothing more than a paper cut. He wanted to make me look like a senile old man, clinging to shadows. The rage surged inside me, molten and unrelenting, but I buried it deep. My face stayed stone. Cold. Empty. Let him think I was buying it. Let him think he was winning. Every lie he told was another rope in the noose he was tying for himself. Morris stood near the mantelpiece with his arms crossed. His face gave away nothing. He didn't interrupt, didn't challenge, didn't even clear his throat. He just watched, letting Chad keep talking. Chad seemed to mistake the silence for agreement. The longer Morris stayed quiet, the more confident Chad became. "Listen," Chad finally said, stepping into the middle of the room like it was his stage. "I'll take care of this. I'll call her friends. I'll check the places she likes to go. I'll find her. I'm sure this is nothing more than a big misunderstanding." He said it with the ease of a man who had rehearsed the lines 100 times. He looked at me, then at Morris as if to say, "See? I'm the one holding this family together." In just a few minutes, he had reshaped the entire story. He was no longer the husband with questions hanging over his head. No, he had turned himself into the strong, responsible one, the man in control. Then he walked over to me. His hand landed on my shoulder, heavy and hot. The touch burned, though he smiled as if it were an act of comfort. "You just rest, Theo," he said softly. "Let me take care of my wife." His fingers squeezed, not gently but firmly, a hidden show of dominance under the mask of kindness. Then, without waiting for my reply, he turned and walked out of the house. Through the window, we watched him move with calm, deliberate steps. He climbed into his expensive silver car, pulled out his phone, and made a short call. He didn't look worried. He didn't look desperate. He looked like a man executing a plan. A few minutes later, the car glided away down the street, and the sound of the engine faded into the distance. The house was silent, the kind of silence that settles in thick and heavy after a storm. The front door clicked shut, but the air still felt poisoned by the lies Chad had left behind. Morris finally exhaled, a long, slow breath that sounded more like frustration than relief. It was the first real sign of emotion he had shown since Chad had walked in. He stepped to the window, staring at the empty street where the car had disappeared. "He's good," Morris muttered. His voice was low, like a growl. "Too good. He's a professional liar. Every word he spoke was polished. Smooth. He's told that story before, or something like it." He was ready. Then he turned and looked straight at me. His face was hard, but his voice softened. "I believe you, Theo. 100%. I know your daughter. And I know you. You wouldn't have called me unless something was truly wrong." For the first time since Chad left, Amani spoke. Her voice shook as though every word cost her strength. "Then what can you do, David? What happens now?" Morris shook his head. His eyes were heavy with the kind of frustration I had only ever seen in men who wanted to act but couldn't. "That's the problem, Amani. Right now, the law doesn't give me much. We have a package with a stain on it, and we'll get it tested, but that takes time. We have a missing woman, yes, but she's an adult. Adults are allowed to disappear if they want to. And now, thanks to Chad's little performance, we have a husband with a neat explanation. He's painting her as unstable, depressed. That kind of story is poison, It covers every hole, explains away every doubt. He ran a hand over his face, then looked back at me with a grim expression. We can't get a warrant to search his house or dig into his finances with just a gut feeling and a bloodstain. He knows it. That's why he's so calm. He's hiding behind the rules, using them as his shield. He's turning the system into his weapon. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if the weight of his words needed space. My hands are tied, Theo. Without something more, I can't move. I need something solid. Something real. Something he can't talk his way around. The room seemed to tilt under me. Everything I had trusted my whole life, the law, the police, the system meant to keep people safe, suddenly felt hollow. It couldn't touch a man like Chad. He was too clever, too careful. He was hiding in plain sight, and the very rules of justice were holding the door open for him. I swallowed hard, my voice barely audible. What kind of thing? Morris's eyes met mine, steady and unflinching. Anything, he said. His voice was heavy, each word pressed with meaning. Something he can't explain away. A contradiction in his story. A witness who saw them arguing. A bank record that doesn't add up. Anything that proves he's lying. Anything that gives me probable cause. Morris didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We all understood what he meant. Without solid proof, the police couldn't really act. They would have to wait for the lab results. And by then it was obvious what could happen. He walked to the door and put a steady hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, Theo," he said softly. "A man who lies that easily is capable of anything. Call me if you think of something, anything at all." Then he left. When the front door clicked shut, the house felt emptier than before. The hope that had come with Morris's arrival went out with him. It was just Amani and me, sitting in the heavy quiet. The truth was somewhere out there, buried inside Chad's smooth lies. The law had limits. The system had rules. And a clever man could hide behind both. For a long moment I felt crushed. The kind of despair that makes you want to sit down and let the room swallow you whole. The rules that were supposed to protect people felt like a wall now. A wall that kept me from getting to my daughter. Then I looked at Amani. She stood near the kitchen doorway, pale and shaking, but her eyes were fixed on me. They held something more than fear. They held trust. She believed in me. Something inside me changed. The cold panic that had lived in my chest turned into something harder. It didn't go away, it sharpened. It became a purpose. I thought of the workshop I had sold, the nights bent over a project, the way I had learned to turn a rough piece of wood into something honest and strong. For years I had swallowed my pride. I'd ignored little insults. I had stayed silent when I should have spoken. I had thought quiet was better than conflict. I had been trying to keep the family together. But staying quiet had cost my daughter. That stopped now. I realized my silence had been cowardice. The man who took advantage of Anna used charm, not force. He stole her life with small, careful moves. He treated us like a resource. People to be used and discarded. That was a predator's work, not a husband's. I had lived with that truth in my bones, pretending not to see. Today I could not pretend. The helplessness faded. In its place came a calm, hard resolve. It settled into me like a piece of ironwood. Slow, strong, and unbending. Chad had thought of me as an old man who would fold. He had underestimated what I knew how to do. He had mistaken my silence for weakness. From now on, I would turn my patience the way I once turned wood on the lathe. I would use small, careful moves. I would look for seams and knots where a lie might hide. I would pry open every corner of their story until something real and useful showed itself. A broken account, a dishonest friend, a witness who had been afraid to speak. My mind, which had been cluttered with fear, cleared. A plan began to form, rough at first and then clearer with each breath. I would not rely on waiting for the lab. I would not wait for proof to fall neatly into my lap. I would start where I could, call old friends, check places Anna liked, look through the papers I still had from the workshop sale. I would listen for the small things that didn't fit. It would take time. It would be careful, quiet work. But I had patience. I had attention to detail. I could watch and wait and then move exactly when the moment came. I would gather the facts that Morris needed. I would build a case of my own if I had to. Amani came to my side and took my hand. Her grip was thin but steady. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We both knew what had to happen next. The house was quiet, but the quiet felt different now. It felt like the calm before action. I would find the contradiction. I would find the witness. I would find the papers that did not add up. I would find anything that proved he was lying. I would give Morris the thread he needed to pull the whole thing apart. And if the law could not move fast enough, I would not stand idle. I would do what a father must do. Piece by piece, I would take apart the life Chad had built and expose the truth inside. "I'll make some coffee," Amani said softly. Her voice was calm, steady, but it cut straight through my thoughts. It wasn't really a question. It was a statement, a promise. She knew. She could see the change in me. She understood that this night would not end quickly, that this was only the first step in something bigger, heavier. She knew a war had started, not with guns or fists, but with truth and lies. I nodded and walked to the old roll-top desk in the corner of the living room. It was a piece I had built myself years ago, every groove carved by my own hands. I pulled out the chair and sat down, listening to the familiar creak in the wood. That sound gave me comfort. This was where my fight would begin. Not on the street, not in some courthouse. Right here with paper, memory, and patience. My weapons would not be rage or violence. They would be details, bank statements, names, conversations I had tucked away in the back of my mind. Chad was slick, yes, a liar dressed in a fine suit. But I was a carpenter, and I knew how to build something steady and strong. If I could build a table to last a lifetime, I could build a case that would bring him down. On the desk, the coffee Amani had made sat cooling, steam curling up into the lamplight like a ghost. The house was quiet now, so quiet I could hear the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. That hum seemed louder than it had in years, as if the house itself was holding its breath. This was the beginning. The fear I had felt before, the choking panic, was gone. In its place was a sharp, steady purpose. I understood something now. Chad's greatest weapon wasn't just money or charm. It was his certainty that he was smarter than everyone else. He thought he could talk his way out of anything. He thought he could bury the truth under smooth words. And his second mistake was just as fatal. He believed I was weak. He thought I was just an old man with a soft heart and failing strength. That was going to be his undoing. Because an old man who has nothing left to lose can be the most dangerous kind. I reached down and opened the bottom drawer of the desk. My fingers brushed against something I hadn't touched in years. A worn, leather-bound address book. Its cover was cracked, its pages yellowed, but it was full of names. Names written in my own faded ink. These weren't just names on paper. They were people. Friends, allies, men and women I had known, helped, trusted. My network wasn't built on money or deals. It was built on handshakes, stories shared over long nights, favors exchanged without keeping score. Chad had business partners. I had something stronger, friends. I flipped through the pages slowly until one name stopped me. Earl Washington. My old army buddy. We had served together a lifetime ago, and after his service, he had gone into banking. He had worked his way up from the bottom, all the way to being a senior loan officer at one of the biggest banks in Atlanta. He had retired last year, but I knew Earl. A man like him never really steps away. He still had connections. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. My heart beat steady, not frantic now, but with the rhythm of a man who had chosen his path. He answered on the second ring. "Theo." "As I live and breathe," Earl said, his voice booming and warm, just as I remembered. "It's been too long. What can I do for you on this fine Father's Day evening?" I didn't waste time with small talk. Earl was a straight man, and I knew he'd respect directness. "I need a favor, Earl," I said quietly. "A quiet one. It's about my son-in-law." There was a pause. When Earl spoke again, his tone was different. Cautious now, measured. "What about him?" "He's an investment man," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "The way you measure would be for a final cut. Always talking about his ventures, his deals. I've been keeping a list. For my daughter's sake. I need to know if the companies he brags about are real, if they're solid, or if they're smoke." As I spoke, I thought back to the countless family dinners over the years. I could see Chad sitting at the table, glass of wine in hand, his voice full of arrogance as he bragged about his brilliance. He would toss out names of corporations, trusts, holding companies. Names meant to impress, to confuse, to make me feel small. He thought I wasn't listening. But I was. And more importantly, I had written them down. Now I read that list to Earl. 3 different LLCs. All vague. All with names designed to sound important. "I don't want details," I said firmly. "I just want to know if they're real. If they're legitimate. That's all." There was silence on the line for a long time. Then Earl spoke, and his voice carried the weight of certainty. "You're worried he's a fraud," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm worried for my daughter," I corrected. He let out a slow breath. "Give me 24 hours, Theo. I'll make some calls. Quiet ones. I'll be discreet." Relief washed through me, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you, Earl." I hung up the phone. One hook was in the water. Now I needed another. I flipped through the book again until I found another number. Ben Carter, the son of my old friend Elias, who had passed on years ago. Ben was young, sharp, a lawyer with a reputation for being a bulldog in court. He specialized in financial law. If there were cracks in Chad's shiny facade, Ben was the kind of man who could spot them. I picked up the phone again. The hunt had begun. This is a beautiful pivot. The scene shifts from abstract legal strategy into something tactile, something only Theo could notice. The memory triggered by the envelope feels authentic and organic, perfectly grounded in his carpenter's mind and habit of observation. It's a great way to transition from lost in thought to finding the first thread to pull. To make this section even sharper, anchor the spark. Right now, the transition from the envelope to the memory works, but you could highlight the pattern recognition moment. How the official font and return address mirror something he saw that day at Chad's house. That gives the trigger more bite. Foreshadow the clue. As Theo recalls fixing the fence, maybe you can hint at the detail he overlooked then. A discarded envelope, a name on a form, a company logo on a letter sitting on the counter. This primes the reader for the breakthrough moment. Tie it to Ben's advice. Have Theo explicitly connect this memory to proof documentation. It makes the memory feel like fate, but also earned. His craftsman's patience finally paying off. Here's a tightened version of the pivot you could layer in without losing the flow. The return address. The sterile, official font. That was it. I'd seen that same print before. bold and smug on an envelope half buried under a pile of unopened mail in Chad's study. Last May, the day I was fixing their fence. Anika had been apologetic when she asked me, but I hadn't minded. The smell of cut grass, the rhythm of hammer against wood, it gave me a little peace. What I hadn't realized then, what I had pushed aside, was how my eyes had snagged on that envelope. A company name I didn't recognize. A name Chad had bragged about later at dinner. One of the same names I had just read aloud to Earl. My pulse quickened. This wasn't memory for memory's sake. This was documentation. This was a trail. Oh, this is fantastic. You've just landed the smoking gun moment. And the way you stage it makes it believable, human, and heartbreaking. The scene of Theo literally pressing down the recycling is such a mundane action, but it blooms into revelation. That juxtaposition is gold. A few ways you could sharpen this. The flicker in Chad's mask. You nailed it already, but you could lean harder into how unsettling that half second is for Theo, like a predator's eyes briefly revealed. That's the moment that tells him everything, even before Anna's silence. Anna's presence. Right now, she appears and looks pale, but you could add one small tell. Maybe her hands gripping the doorframe, or her voice almost saying something before she swallows it. That would make her fear feel even more visceral. Theo's regret. You already have him feeling the stab of shame. You could deepen it by tying it back to his pattern of silence. I'd told myself it was peace. But peace built on silence is just another kind of cowardice. I'd been blind, and worse, I'd chosen to be. Resolution shift. Let the regret transform into clarity and determination in one breath. Like the craftsman in him sees exactly what needs to be done now. Here's a possible tweak to the closing paragraph. The memory faded, leaving me back at my desk in the dead of night. But the image of those papers was burned into my mind. Apex Pinnacle Holdings. The other names. Anna's signature scrawled across dozens of contracts she likely never even read. It wasn't boring paperwork. It was the blueprint of a fraud, and my daughter was the foundation he was building it on. Ben's words came back to me like a hammer striking steel. Gather proof. I realized then that the key I had been searching for wasn't lost. I'd held it in my hands once and thrown it back in the trash. The shame hit hard, but it didn't cripple me. It fueled me. Those papers were the proof, and if Chad thought burying them in a recycling bin meant they were gone, he had no idea who he was up against. Those papers were the beginning. I didn't fully understand what they meant yet, but I knew they were the first clue, the first thread I could follow in a tangled web of lies. For the first time, I felt I had a direction. I knew what I was looking for, even if I didn't know exactly what it would lead to. The next afternoon, late and heavy with heat, the phone rang. It startled me out of a restless doze in my armchair. My heart jumped in my chest, hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I snatched up the receiver before it even rang twice. It was Earl. I didn't even say hello. I couldn't. What did you find? I asked, my voice dry, rough, rasping from tension and worry. Earl didn't waste a single word. Theo, he said, and the warmth in his voice was gone. He sounded serious, professional, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It's worse than you thought. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. The 3 LLCs you asked me about, he continued. Apex Pinnacle, Sterling Horizon Ventures, and Gold Key Capital. Yes, I said, leaning forward, my chest pressing against the edge of the armchair. What about them? They're ghosts, he said flatly. I froze, the words hitting me like a hammer. Ghosts. I didn't even need him to explain yet. I already knew the weight of it. He went on anyway. They exist on paper, he said, registered out of a P.O. box in Delaware. But that's it. No assets, no employees, no trading history. They're classic shell companies, the kind people use to move money around without leaving a trace. From a distance, they look legitimate, but when you get close, there's nothing there. It's a house of cards, Theo. A house of cards built to collapse the second you touch it. I sat back in the chair, the words echoing in my head. Ghosts. A house of cards. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. My suspicions weren't just the paranoid fears of an old man. They were real. What does that mean exactly? I asked, even though I already had an idea. I needed him to say it. I needed the truth to come from him. It means your son-in-law isn't an investor, Theo, Earl said, his voice hard and steady, like a hammer striking iron. He's a con man. These companies, they're fronts. Likely for fraud. He's probably using them to launder money, or to make it look like he's running a legitimate business to lure others in. It's all fake. It's a show. I could hear his breath on the other end of the line. Listen to me, my friend. This is serious. Be careful. A man who builds his world out of lies will do anything to protect it. Anything. I thanked him, my throat tight, words barely forming, and hung up. I sat there, the phone still warm in my hand, staring at nothing. The truth was beginning to emerge, and it was worse than I had imagined. Chad wasn't just manipulative. He wasn't just a liar. He was a criminal. He had built his life on deception, and my daughter Anna was caught in the middle of it. Her signature on those papers flashed in my mind again. Before, it had frightened me. Now it terrified me. She wasn't just a victim of emotional abuse. She was entangled in his financial schemes, tied to ghost companies she didn't even know existed. She was trapped, legally and financially, and it was all his doing. I felt a cold dread spread through me, heavier than any fear I had felt before. This was no longer about a marriage gone wrong or a selfish son-in-law. This was about my daughter's freedom, her safety, her future. But the next discovery came not from friends, not from calls or contacts, but from something closer. My own habits, my own past, and the careful life I had always led. After the call with Earl, I couldn't sit still. I needed to act. I moved to the old filing cabinet in my study, the sturdy oak piece I had built myself decades ago. Every important document of my life was stored there. Receipts, deeds, letters, and contracts. The kind of things I kept because I understood their value. I opened the drawers slowly, reverently almost. The house was quiet around me. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. I knew deep down that inside that cabinet, amidst my life's careful records, I would find the next clue. The next piece of the puzzle. My daughter's life and Chad's lies were about to be pulled apart, one document at a time. I started going through the files in the old cabinet. Tax returns, mortgage papers, business records from the workshop. Anything that might connect to the names Earl had given me. My hands moved almost on their own, flipping through paper after paper, searching for something. Anything that could give me a clue. Then I found a thick folder labeled Workshop Sale 2018. It contained all the documents from when I had sold my business, the sale that had funded Anika and Chad's down payment on their home. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I knew every paper inside, or at least I thought I did. As I sifted through the familiar pages, a single sheet slipped out and fell to the floor. I picked it up, and my blood ran cold before I even read the words. It was a loan guarantee application. The lender's name was unfamiliar. The amount, $250,000. My hand shook. I looked at the date. Just 6 months ago. The business receiving the loan was Apex Pinnacle Holdings, one of Chad's ghost companies. My heart pounded, a frantic, heavy rhythm that echoed in my ears. And then I saw it. The guarantor, the person legally responsible for the debt, was me. There was my name, my social security number, a copy of my driver's license, and at the bottom, a signature that was almost perfect, a forgery of my own. He hadn't just taken the money I had given him over the years. He had stolen my identity. He had used the trust and reputation I had built over 72 years to secure a massive fraudulent loan. My vision blurred. I sank into my chair, the paper trembling in my hand. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a violation of everything I had worked for. My good name, my reputation, my life. All of it had been weaponized against me. And if that loan went unpaid, the banks wouldn't come after Chad or his shell companies. They would come after me. They would take my home. They would take everything Amani and I had built together. Rage consumed me. Pure, absolute rage that burned away every last shred of fear. This wasn't just proof, it was a weapon. The evidence Morris needed. Chad had spent years building a cage for my daughter. Now I realized he had been building one for me too. And he was about to find out what happens when a man with nothing left to lose fights back. My hands were shaking as I dialed Morris's number. But my voice, when he answered, was steady, cold, and hard. "David," I said. "It's Theo. I have it. I have the proof." "What is it?" His voice went instantly alert. All business. "It's better if I show you," I said. "Can you come back to the house and come alone?" "On my way," he said without hesitation. When Morris arrived, I didn't even invite him to sit. I led him straight to my desk. I had the evidence laid out, neat and undeniable, on the polished oak surface. I felt like a general before a battle, pointing at the first piece of paper. "These are the companies Chad has been bragging about for years," I said. "Apex Pinnacle Holdings, Sterling Horizon Ventures, Gold Key Capital. My friend at the bank confirmed it this afternoon." Morris leaned in, scanning the documents with the precision of a man who had seen countless lies before. He didn't say a word at first. I could feel the tension in the room, the weight of what I had just uncovered pressing down on both of us. This is federal," he finally said, his voice low and steady. "This is the evidence we need. You're not just chasing shadows anymore, Theo. This is real. This is solid." I nodded, my hands still trembling. But now the fear had gone. The anger had transformed into purpose. The war had begun, and this time I wasn't going to lose. "They're ghosts," Earl said. "Shell corporations registered to a P.O. box. They have no assets, no employees, no real business. They're a complete fraud." Morris studied the list, his jaw tightening. "That's a start," he said slowly. "It shows a pattern of deception, but it's not enough to get a warrant for his house. He could say these are just failed startups." "I know," I said, my voice low. "But this is different." I slid a single sheet of paper from the folder across the desk toward him. "The loan guarantee application," I said. Morris picked it up. I watched his eyes move across the page, following the numbers, the names, the dates. His expression shifted. Curiosity, then shock, then a cold, hard anger. He saw the loan amount. He saw the name of the shell company. Then he saw my name, my social security number, and the forged signature at the bottom. He looked up at me, the paper clutched tightly in his hand. "He stole your identity, Theo," he said, his voice a low growl. "Yes," I said. "He used my good name to fund his house of cards. And he did it 6 months ago." This was the turning point. The power in the room shifted. No longer was it my word against his. Now it was written proof, a federal crime staring us in the face. Morris's hands were no longer tied. I had just handed him the tools he needed. He carefully placed the document back on the desk as if it were sacred. "This is it," he said, a new energy in his voice. "Identity theft. Bank fraud. Forgery. These are serious federal offenses. This gives me more than enough to get a warrant. I can access everything. His personal accounts, his business records, his phone, everything." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a predator in his eyes. "He thinks he's untouchable," Morris said. "He's about to find out how wrong he is." The balance had tipped. The old carpenter had just handed the law a hammer. Now it was time to bring it down. Morris pulled out his phone, moving with precision and speed. I sat at my desk, watching, powerless yet exhilarated, as the wheels of justice began to turn. "Get me Judge Miller," Morris said sharply into the phone. "Tell him it's about the bank fraud case we discussed last week. No, this one's new. It's airtight. I have evidence of identity theft, forgery, and multiple shell corporations tied to a potential kidnapping." The word kidnapping hung in the room like a weight. Hearing it aloud made it terrifyingly real. My quiet, personal investigation was over. This was now a federal case. For the next hour, my home, once a place of quiet retirement, became a command center. Morris moved with a speed and intensity that left me breathless, explaining the plan as he paced. His strategy was a three-pronged attack, designed to close in on Chad from every angle, leaving him nowhere to hide. "First," Morris said, his eyes flashing with determination, "we cut off his money. The warrant for bank fraud gives us the power to freeze every asset he owns," Morris said, pacing slowly, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Checking accounts, investment portfolios, credit cards, everything. By the time he even realizes what's happening, he won't have enough cash to buy a bus ticket." It was a brilliant, ruthless move. Chad's entire world, his power, his confidence, the life he'd built on the illusion of wealth, was about to be pulled from under him. Morris continued, "Second, we get eyes everywhere. The warrant gives us access to his home, his car, his office. We're not just looking for Anna. We're looking for computers, documents, anything that ties him to these shell companies and the fraudulent loan. We're going to dismantle his entire operation, piece by piece." Then he turned to me, his expression grave. "And third, we find your daughter. The felony warrants allow us to trace both his and Anna's phones in real time. We'll know where he is and hopefully where he's taken her." Hope, fragile and flickering, returned to me. But it was a sharp, anxious hope. The trap was being set with terrifying efficiency. Somewhere out there, Chad was probably enjoying a drink, convinced he had escaped. He had no idea the net was closing in. Once all the calls were made and the warrants approved, Morris stood. He put a firm hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Theo. You did what we couldn't. You gave us the key. Now let us open the door. Stay by the phone. Don't leave the house. We'll call as soon as we have something." Then he left. The house fell silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't the despair of helplessness. It was the tense electric quiet that comes just before a storm breaks. Amani and I sat together in the living room, not speaking, just waiting. The trap was set. The hunters were in position. And somewhere out there, a monster was walking straight into it, completely unaware that the quiet, underestimated man he had mocked had just signed his final warrant. It was just after dusk when the phone rang again. My body jolted, adrenaline surging. I snatched it up. "Theo," Morris said, his voice stripped of warmth. It was the voice of a man who had stared into the abyss. "We got the preliminary lab report on the box," he said. I held my breath. "The blood is a match for your daughter, Anika," he continued. Even though I had expected it, the confirmation hit me like a punch to the stomach. My daughter's blood, used as a prop in some sick, calculated game. But that's not all, Morris said, his voice grim. It wasn't a gift. It was a setup. A stage carefully constructed to frame your daughter. I struggled to understand the calculated cruelty behind it. Morris went on. Inside the box under some tissue paper were two things. First, a cheap disposable burner phone. Second, a thick manila envelope. Inside the envelope were fabricated documents. Fake bank statements showing large wire transfers to an offshore account and a printed flight confirmation to the Cayman Islands. Everything was under Anika's name. And underneath it all, a typed letter. It looked like a suicide note, designed to make it seem she planned to abandon her life. My stomach turned. The scale of Chad's deception, his cold calculation, hit me harder than anything before. But at that moment I knew one thing. The net was closing and justice was about to strike. Morris read a part of the letter to me over the phone. The words were cold, precise, and devastating. They described a woman trapped in a suffocating marriage, crushed by the interference of her parents. It painted Anika as resentful, unstable, and unfaithful. A woman running away with a secret lover, taking all the money she could get her hands on. Then came the cruelest twist. The letter blamed me. It claimed that my constant distrust of Chad, my old-fashioned ways, my interference in their lives, had destroyed their marriage. Every word was designed to hurt, to destroy my reputation, to make me look like the villain in my daughter's life. And the blood on the box suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, a dramatic detail meant to make Chad's story believable. A woman in distress, desperate and emotional. He had staged it all. Perhaps he told her it was a prank, or forced her in some way. It was the final, chilling piece of his performance. The full scale of his plan crashed down on me. This wasn't just about money. It was total annihilation. He planned to drain every last shred of trust, use my good name to commit fraud, make my daughter vanish, and paint himself as the grieving, wronged husband. Anna would be labeled a thief, a traitor. And I would be remembered as the father who drove her away. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. The man my daughter had married wasn't just a con artist. He was a meticulous, patient monster who had been planning this for years. That box on my coffee table was meant to be his final, triumphant act. The hours that followed were endless. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like a hammer striking my skull. Amani and I sat in the living room, the coffee long cold, trapped in a terrible limbo. We knew horrors, yet the full truth remained hidden. Then, just as the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains, my phone buzzed violently against the polished wood of the end table. It was Morris. I grabbed it, my hand shaking. "Theo," he said, his voice tight, taut with adrenaline. "We have them. We have a location." Hope surged, sharp and painful. "Both of them?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Yes," he said. "The warrants came through. We put a trace on both of their phones. They've been stationary for the last few hours. North Georgia, near the mountains. A remote rental cabin. Only one road in, one road out. He has nowhere to run. I could hear him moving, the crunch of gravel under tires. We're moving in now, Theo. I'll call you when it's over. Stay strong." Then the line went dead. For a heartbeat, the world felt impossibly still. And then, finally, after months of fear and uncertainty, I felt it. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, and real. The trap had been set. The hunters were closing in. And Chad was walking straight into it, blind to the storm about to break. The silence that followed was unbearable. Far worse than the waiting before. It pressed down on me like a weight, filled with impossible images, each one more horrifying than the last. I imagined a SWAT team moving through the mountains, a standoff, a desperate act from a man who saw no way out. Amani knelt beside me, whispering prayers so soft I almost couldn't hear them. Her words were a thin thread of faith in the middle of a storm I couldn't control. I couldn't pray. I could only see my daughter's face over and over in my mind, imagining every possible danger, every possible outcome. Time stretched and warped. Minutes felt like hours. I paced the length of our living room again and again, wearing a groove in the old Oriental rug. The same rug I had paced when Anika was a baby with a high fever. The same rug I had walked while waiting for her to come home from her first prom. My legs ached, but I couldn't stop. Almost an hour later, the phone rang again. My heart leapt, my hands trembling as I snatched it up. "Theo, we have her," Morris said. His voice carried exhaustion, relief, and the sharp edge of triumph. "She's safe. She's alive." A sound escaped me. A strangled, shaky sob, pure relief spilling from my chest. My legs gave way, and I sank onto the sofa, the phone pressed to my ear like a lifeline. Amani rushed to my side, her eyes wide, frantic, full of questions. I could only nod, tears streaming down my face. "She's safe," I mouthed to her. Morris spoke again, calm but precise. "We breached the property just after sunrise." He didn't resist. I think he never imagined we'd find him. He was in the main room, packing a bag, getting ready to run. And Anika. She was in a locked bedroom at the back. She's shaken up, bruised, but she's strong, just like her old man. Hearing her was alive, that she had survived this nightmare, left me weak. Hollow. All the fear, the anger, the sleepless nights, they melted away for a moment. She was alive. She was safe. That was all that mattered. The rest, the lies, the money, the danger was noise. I asked the question I had been holding back, my voice colder now, sharper. "What about him?" "Chad Miller is in custody," Morris said. "He's on his way back to Atlanta. He's facing federal charges: bank fraud, identity theft, and kidnapping. He won't see the outside of a prison cell for a very, very long time." I let that sink in. The trap we had set, the trap that started with a small, ugly box and a father refusing to stay silent, had finally snapped shut. The monster was caught. My daughter was free. The storm, at last, was over. Morris told me later how it had ended. It wasn't a dramatic showdown or a high-speed chase. It was quiet. Too quiet. Chad had walked into a small-town bank about 50 miles north of the city, trying to withdraw a large sum of cash, the first step in his plan to disappear. He had walked in like he owned the place, dressed in a crisp linen shirt, radiating confidence and importance. But he didn't know his empire was already in ruins. His accounts were frozen. His name was on a federal watch list. Every illusion of control he had built was gone. He was a king who didn't realize he had already been deposed. The trap had been sprung hours before, silent, inevitable, perfect. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my chest. My daughter was safe. Justice had been served. And finally, I could breathe again. The young bank teller followed the instructions from the authorities. She was polite, professional, and firm. The transaction Chad had come to make was declined. Chad, of course, did not take it well. He became indignant immediately, demanding to see the manager. He rattled off the names of powerful friends he claimed would punish the bank for daring to inconvenience him. He spoke with arrogance, with loud, exaggerated confidence. Every word dripped with entitlement, as if the rules of the world were supposed to bend to his will. He launched into a long, condescending tirade about the incompetence of small-town employees. Every gesture, every tone, screamed superiority. He was certain, absolutely certain, that he was untouchable. Then, without warning, 2 men in plain clothes walked into the bank. They did not draw weapons. They did not shout. They did not make any move to provoke him. They simply stood near the door, calm, deliberate, and watchful. One of them was Morris. Morris later told me that the moment Chad laid eyes on him, every ounce of color drained from his face. The mask of arrogance, outrage, and entitlement didn't just crack, it disintegrated. In its place was the hollow-eyed stare of a man staring straight into the truth he had been avoiding for months. He saw in an instant that it was over. Every clever plan, every layered lie, every manipulation had come to nothing. The bravado that had built his illusion of power evaporated, leaving only something small, pathetic, and terrified. Chad didn't speak another word. Morris and his partner walked calmly across the marble floor. "Chad Miller," Morris said, his voice echoing slightly in the suddenly silent bank. "You're under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, and kidnapping." Chad's hands rose slowly and went behind his back. When the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, there was no fight, no resistance, no last-minute scheme. Morris later told me the last thing he saw was Chad's reflection in the polished glass of the bank door as they led him away. A reflection of a man who had gambled everything on the belief that he was smarter than everyone else, and lost. A man brought down by the one person he had underestimated. An old carpenter who refused to stay silent. The house of cards Chad had built finally collapsed. We went to see Anika at the hospital. The room was quiet, sterile, and painfully calm. She sat up in bed wearing a pale blue hospital gown that made her look smaller, more fragile than I had ever seen her. There was a dark, ugly bruise on her cheek, a silent testament to the terror she had endured. When she saw us, she broke down. The flood of tears, the sobs, were raw and unstoppable, the weight of months of fear and pain finally pouring out. We rushed to her side, holding her tight as she clung to us. It was relief and grief entwined, a storm finally breaking. When the tears subsided, she began to speak, her voice quiet, hoarse, but steady enough to tell the story. "It all started months ago," she said. She had discovered the loan documents Chad had been making her sign weren't for investments at all. They were to cover massive debts from failed and fraudulent deals. He was in over his head, and he was using her, her name, her credit, everything, just to keep himself afloat. When she confronted him, the man she had married, the charming, sophisticated man, vanished. In his place was a cold, cruel stranger. The verbal manipulation escalated into threats. He took her phone, her car keys, her credit cards. He trapped her inside their own home. "He said it was my fault," she whispered, eyes distant, haunted by the memory. "He said my negativity, my family's interference, ruined his business. He started talking about a plan, a way to start over, a way to get rid of all the deadweight in his life." Her voice cracked, a whisper trembling in the quiet hospital room. The deadweight was us. Me. You. Mom. The Father's Day box had been his masterpiece, his final act. Every detail of it was calculated, planned with a chilling sense of theatricality. He had rehearsed this entire story in his mind, picturing the moment we would all believe it. Anna running away, me powerless to stop it. Anna's voice trembled as she told me what had happened. "He hit me when I refused to write the letter," she said, her hand instinctively brushing the bruise on her cheek. "He said it had to be believable. He held my hand, forcing me to write those horrible things about you and Mom." Her voice cracked. "Then he came at me with a pin. He said it was the final touch for his story. He took my blood for the box. He told me that after Father's Day, after everyone thought I had run away, we would disappear." Her eyes met mine, haunted yet clear. "But I saw the look in his eyes, Dad. He wasn't planning for us to disappear. He was planning for me to disappear." The realization struck me like a physical blow. Everything I had suspected, everything that had felt wrong for months, suddenly made horrifying sense. He wasn't just a con man. He was a monster. He had planned to kill my daughter and use a Father's Day gift as his alibi. I looked at Anna, strength shining through her pain, and my heart ached with a fierce physical force of love. Guilt burned me, too. The thought that my hesitation, my silence, might have allowed this to happen. I wanted to tell her I was sorry, that I should have acted sooner, that I should have fought harder. But when our eyes met, there was no blame in her gaze. Only a profound, bottomless gratitude. "You knew, Dad," she whispered. "When you got that box, you didn't just see a gift. You saw me. You heard me when I couldn't even speak. You saved my life." I reached out and took her hand, my rough, calloused fingers wrapping around hers. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't need to. The long, silent war was over. I simply said the words that mattered. "You're home now, baby girl. You're home." In the quiet of the sterile hospital room, battered but together, we began to heal. Weeks passed. Our house was quiet again, but it was no longer the heavy silence of fear. It was the gentle, healing quiet of peace. Anna stayed with us, and I watched her slowly reclaim her light. She laughed more. She began sketching again. Her architectural design sprawled across the dining room table. We didn't speak often about the past. We didn't need to. Together, we were rebuilding our family, plank by plank, on a foundation of truth. That Father's Day box, the instrument of such terror, sat in an evidence locker somewhere, catalogued and filed. I never opened it. And I realized then that it was, in a strange way, the most important gift I had ever received. Not a gift of love, but a gift of clarity. For far too long, I had chosen a fragile peace over necessary action, believing that silence could protect those I loved. I had been wrong. True strength, true love, isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about being the anchor in the middle of it. My name is Theodore Coington. I am 72 years old, a retired carpenter. On the day my world almost ended, I learned something vital. The most powerful tools a man has aren't the ones he holds in his hands. They are the ones he holds in his heart. Wisdom earned over a lifetime, a network of true friends, and a father's unyielding love. I didn't open the box. I opened my eyes. And in doing so, I saved my daughter and reclaimed the one thing a man can truly call his own: his dignity.